Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Auravani Bacharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Askatyade Satarne. I hope everyone had a happy Janmashtami and Srila Prabhupada's appearance day. This particular class will be explaining something about what I've understood as Srila Prabhupada's position and some of the problems that may face ourselves and ISKCON when we don't properly understand what Srila Prabhupada's actual position is within our society. That underlying all the controversies and philosophical questions in our society is actually understanding correctly what is Srila Prabhupada's position within our society. That was Srila Prabhupada a Nityasiddha, a Mahabhagavata, a Shaktavesha avatar, or was he a Sadhanasiddha, a pure devotee who attained perfection in this lifetime? The latter, or the fact that Prabhupada was a Sadhanasiddha, a pure devotee attaining perfection in this lifetime, is how the GBC depicted him shortly after his departure. Now let us start with, as I said in my class the other day, in order to understand what a pure devotee in Mahabhagavat is, we have to be a pure devotee in Mahabhagavat also, in order to actually be able to perceive the activities of such an exalted devotee. We have to be on the same platform that they're on. But then again, to understand Krishna, Lord Krishna, as he says in Bhagavad Gita, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatvataha tyaktva deham panarjanma naiti mam eti sarjana. That one can understand by tattva. Tattva means, tat means that, and tva means a collection of things that are perceivable. In other words, in order to, as we become conscious of Krishna, as we're able to perceive him directly by our own experience, to that degree, we not only become eligible to go back to the spiritual world, but we also develop faith in Krishna, that he's an actual person and that we have an eternal relationship with him. At the beginning, we hear about Krishna theoretically. As Srila Prabhupada explains in his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, that the reason why he wrote the Bhagavad Gita as it is because one lady asked him to recommend an edition of the Bhagavad Gita that she could read. And Prabhupada told the lady that, unfortunately, there's no edition of the Bhagavad Gita that I can actually recommend to you, because all the editions that I know of, they've all given their own opinion without actually touching on the true spirit of the Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, none of them can be said to be strictly authoritative. Just like we want to take a medicine, we can't take the medicine, or we shouldn't take the medicine, according to our own whim. We have to read the label on the bottle, as well as consult with an expert physician. So the Bhagavad Gita should be taken or accepted as was spoken by the speaker himself, Lord Shri Krishna. And on every page of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Shri Krishna is mentioned as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he's also mentioned in such authoritative literatures as the Brahma Samhita and Puranas such as the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, Arjuna could understand because he was Lord Krishna's friend and devotee, a direct student and intimate friend. Ultimately, he says that Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Paramam Bhavam, Purusham Shasvatam Divyam, Adi Devam Ajam Vibhum. That you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate truth, the supreme abode, etc. But Arjuna is not flattering Krishna, because he also says, Ahus Tvam Rishya Sarve Deva Shir Narada Dasha Asilo Devalo Vyasa Swayam Chaiva Pravishime, that you're also declared by authorities like Devala, Asita, Vyasadeva, and Narada as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, of course, none of us have met either Devala or Asita, much less know who they are. Nor have we met Vyasadeva and Narada. And therefore, our tendency to accept them as an authority may not be very high. It is very hard for us to accept authorities, especially in a world where these personalities who do extraordinary things are considered to be part of a fictitious literature. Because in Srimad Bhagavatam, for instance, or Brahma Samhita, it's describing things that are, quote, supposedly unscientific. And therefore, due to our association with so-called authorities since our birth, who have defined to us what the limits of an authority would be, we've come to accept ordinary people as an authority. Although, for instance, we may not have met, for instance, in Russia, Vladimir Lenin. But none of us will actually dispute the fact that Mr. Lenin existed at some time. Although we have never met Mr. Lenin, nor have we ever met anyone who met Mr. Lenin. But due to the overwhelming influence of our association, we've come to accept such ordinary persons as actually authorities, or at least real persons who have existed in the past. Now, Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Lord Krishna, and in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells us one simple fact at the beginning, which gives him the status of a real authority. That he tells us that Denosmi nita dehe kalmaram yovanam jara tata dahantara praptira diryas tatra namuyati. Unlike most other authorities in this world, Krishna starts with a realistic statement, which 99.99% of the other so-called authorities in this world are unaware of, namely reality. And that reality is that we're all in a body that's changing. But we ourselves who are aware of these bodies, we're not changing. Which the logical conclusion would be, if something is changing around us, but we're not changing at all, that means that we're eternal. Now, due to the illusory energy, we still misidentify ourselves with these gross and subtle bodies because we cannot surpass so easily the influence of illusory energy. As long as we desire in this material world to gain something, or we're afraid of losing something, then we're influenced by Krishna's superior energy called illusion. And therefore, in spite of the fact that we have some intelligence, which is gained by hearing Krishna speak Bhagavad Gita at the beginning, still that intelligence is not sufficient to overcome the illusory energy. And therefore, in spite of knowing, at least theoretically, that we're not this body, still we remain within the bodily concept of life. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Daivi Yesha Gunamayi, Mama Maya Dharatya, Mam Eva Ye Prapadyante, Mayam Etam Tarantite. This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes, is difficult to overcome, but those who take shelter of me can easily pass beyond it. So here is a case where we're hearing from Krishna, and there's some knowledge being given to us, which is, as Prabhupada said, if you light a match in a dark room, then the darkness can't put the match out. In spite of the fact that we're covered by the illusory energy and mistake ourselves for these gross and subtle bodies, still this little bit of knowledge lights a little bit of light within our consciousness so we can understand reality a little clearer. But still we understand that even great personalities like Brahma, Shiva, and others, they also can't understand Krishna. So what to speak of our little selves? Therefore, as Prabhupada writes, and I'll quote here, therefore Bhagavad Gita should be taken up in a spirit of devotion. One should not think that he's equal to Krishna, nor should he think that Krishna is an ordinary personality, or even a very great personality. Lord Sri Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. So according to the statements of Bhagavad Gita, or the statements of Arjuna, the person who is trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita, we should at least theoretically accept Sri Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. And with that submissive spirit, we can understand Bhagavad Gita. Unless one reads the Bhagavad Gita in a submissive spirit, it's very difficult to understand Bhagavad Gita because it is a great mystery. If we want to derive any benefit from Bhagavad Gita, then we have to at least theoretically accept that Krishna could be the supreme personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada calls that a submissive spirit. And on that basis, hopefully we're willing to listen to what Krishna says, and then at least try to practice the conclusions that we come to after hearing Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna promises that if we follow that, if we have some faith in Krishna, relying upon Krishna, taking shelter of Krishna, even theoretically, then Krishna will reciprocate with us. Similarly, as it says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Yanra Chite Krishna Prema Karye Udoya, Tanra Vakya Kriya Mudra Vigehana Bujaya. Even the most learned man cannot understand the words, activities, and symptoms of a person situated in love of Godhead. So now let us apply that same analogy to our relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Now, we hear stories about Prabhupada. Sometimes we hear about Prabhupada having almost mystic power. Sometimes we hear about Prabhupada, practically acting as an ordinary person, being depressed, having an ordinary family life. Wife was unsubmissive. He got on the boat, supposedly, to go to America all by himself. No one cared for him. We hear so many stories, and because we think they're coming from authorities, and we think, well, we don't know what to think. Therefore, we become confused because we don't know Prabhupada, and we accept those who perceived him or associated with him. We accept their vision of who they thought Srila Prabhupada was. As a matter of fact, because even those disciples of Prabhupada who associated with him very intimately, if they were conditioned souls, then their vision of him was going to be limited to their own reality of Prabhupada. And what to speak of those who associated with Prabhupada, who were not his disciples, who were supposedly his friends, or his godbrothers, whatever. They certainly had a different vision of Srila Prabhupada. Therefore, if we want to understand Srila Prabhupada correctly, as Prabhupada said, if you want to know me, then read my books. That if we try to understand Prabhupada completely through the vision of conditioned souls, then the result is that we're going to get an incomplete picture of Srila Prabhupada. Now, even if we read what Prabhupada's statements are of himself, or a Mahabhagavat, or a Nityasiddha devotee, etc., due to our own limitations, we can only theoretically accept what Prabhupada says in his books, and then try to apply them within our lives, and that's called being submissive. And what to speak of Srila Prabhupada, that applies to any devotee. As a matter of fact, the lack of faith in Srila Prabhupada, lack of faith in Lord Krishna, will automatically be applied to every single person that we meet, every single devotee we meet. Will also apply that same lack of faith, that same lack of ultimately submission, because we're taking to the process in the wrong way. We're expecting our own materialistic vision, and I'm not saying that necessarily our materialistic vision doesn't have an element of spiritual consciousness within it. But as long as we're conditioned by the modes of material nature, we won't be able to see things properly. And therefore, everything we see is improper. Only when we theoretically accept the Mahabhagavat as our guide, who actually, ultimately, unless we accept Krishna as our guide, with the help of the Mahabhagavat to explain to us what Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita, then everything we see will be distorted by some lesser conception of what Krishna says and what we're perceiving. Now, Krishna writes in Prabhupada, let me just explain something about, this is from Chaitanya Charitamrita. These are the symptoms of a Mahabhagava that are explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Prabhupada's purport to Madhya Lila 19.1.14. Parasya Shaktirva Vidaiva Shuyate. The Supreme Lord has multi-potencies, which the Lord bestows on his fortunate devotees. The Lord has a special potency by which he spreads the Krishna consciousness movement. This is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Kali Kalira Dharma, Krishna Nama Sankirtan, Krishna Shakti Vinatarhe Tara Parvartana. One cannot spread the holy name of Krishna without being specifically empowered by Lord Krishna. A devotee who receives this power from the Lord must be considered very fortunate. The Krishna consciousness movement is spreading to enlighten people about their real position, their original relation with Krishna. One requires Krishna's special power in order to be able to do this. People forget their relation with Krishna and work under the spell of Maya life after life, transmigrating from one body to another. This is the process of material existence. The Supreme Lord Shri Krishna personally descends to teach people that their position in the material world is a mistaken one. One, the Lord again comes as Lord Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to induce people to take the Krishna consciousness. The Lord also empowers a special devotee to teach people their constitutional position. One time, one devotee came to Srila Prabhupada and started to complain to Srila Prabhupada that people are criticizing me. Devotees are criticizing me. So Prabhupada's response was, they criticize Lord Chaitanya. So the devotee said, but Prabhupada, they keep on criticizing me. So Prabhupada said, well, they criticize Lord Chaitanya. What to speak of an ordinary person like ourselves? Of course, Prabhupada was taking the position of an ordinary person. But Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he spread the Sankirtan movement, as we find in Chaitanya Charitamrita, when he went to South India. Now, how did he spread the Sankirtan movement? Because, as Advaita Acharya said, wherever Lord Chaitanya went, there was Vrindavan. Advaita Acharya was not speaking theoretically, but when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was actually, wherever he went, it actually turned the atmosphere into Vrindavan. And when the soul experiences Vrindavan, then he experiences bliss and awakening of his original consciousness. And therefore, simply by going to South India and chanting the holy name, people awaken their dormant Krishna consciousness by his association, because they were actually in Vrindavan. And being in Vrindavan in our heart, they were able to take that Vrindavan, and when they went back to their village, create Vrindavan in that village. Just like when Vidura came back from pilgrimage, he was greeted by Maharaj Yudhisthira with these particular words: Bhavan Vidas Bhagavatas Tirtha Bhutak Swayam Vivo Tirtha Korvanti Tirthani Santakstena Katha Britaha. That saints like yourself are very places of pilgrimage, because wherever you go, you turn that place into a place of pilgrimage, because you carry the Supreme Lord within your heart. Now, of course, Maharaj Yudhisthira was able to perceive that when Vidura came there, he turned that atmosphere into Vaikuntha. Now, Maharaj Yudhisthira was able to perceive that because he was already in Vaikuntha. All the Pandavas were also eternally liberated souls. Similarly, when we see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of course, we hear he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's doing extraordinary activities by changing people's hearts. Now he changed the heart of Prakashananda Saraswati by preaching philosophy, along also Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. But people in South India, when they saw his Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's beauty, they became receptive to his association, and therefore they were able to perceive actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and enter into Vrindavan, into the atmosphere of Vrindavan, by having his association, because they did not have some preconceptions of who Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was. Similarly, Prabhupada writes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Nectar of Instruction, in this verse, Srila Rupa Goswami advises the devotee be intelligent enough to distinguish between the Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. The devotee should also know his own position.
Maharaj, please, you remember I'm translating. I'm not reading off the list. I beg you, please. I'm sorry, but I can't translate like this. Either you tell me the number of the verse so I can look it up. Okay, please.
Instruction, verse number 5. If you can find that. Do you have a Nectar of Instruction there, Madhaji?
Yes, Maharaj, I have it on my phone, but when you just fly over there, you know what I mean? I can't catch up. I'm sorry.
If it's possible, I'll go slower. Or I'll tell you.
No, when you speak, it's fine. But when you start reading off the paper, that's when you speed up, and I can't find it and read it. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Sorry.
Nectar of Instruction. If you go to verse 6 and then go back one paragraph, and just tell me when you find it, and then I'll go on. Or,
Yeah, I'm ready. Готова.
so it's the beginning of the last paragraph of Nectar of Instruction, verse 5. So it says, in this verse, Rupa Goswami, Srila Rupa Goswami, you have that?
I got it.
Advises the devotee to be intelligent enough to distinguish between the Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. The devotee should also know his own position and should not try to imitate a devotee situated on a higher platform. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has given some practical hints to the effect that an Uttama Adhikari Vaishnava can be recognized by his ability to convert many fallen souls to Vaishnavism. So we appreciate Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because his ability to convert many fallen souls into becoming devotees. And that is Krishna's mission. Krishna doesn't come to dance with the gopis or to play with the cowherd boys. He could do that anywhere. He's doing that eternally in Goloka Vrindavan. But he does that in order to help the conditioned souls become inspired to take up the process of devotional service. Similarly, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came in order to bring Vrindavan atmosphere into this world in a way which is accessible to the conditioned souls, specifically by chanting Hare Krishna. Similarly, as Prabhupada writes, Prabhupada sent Charyas, of which Srila Prabhupada is one of them, into this world to spread Krishna consciousness by creating the Vrindavan atmosphere that could actually change people's consciousness to enough degree that they'll take up the process of pure devotional service under his guidance, which is available in his books, his lectures, etc. And also through his representatives, as much as they've understood what Prabhupada was saying, as much as they could create the Vrindavan atmosphere, and to that extent, those followers, if even Prabhupada's followers, could actually inspire people in the devotional service of Krishna. Now, Prabhupada also writes, I'll read slowly, Mataji. Because on the night before he passed away, this is a letter to Rupanuga Tirupati, 28th of April, 1974. Because on the night before he passed away, he talked of so many things, but never mentioned Acharya. His idea was Acharya was not to be nominated among the governing body. He said openly, you make a GBC and conduct a mission. So his idea was amongst the members of GBC would come out successful and self-effulgent Acharya would be automatically selected. In other words, the idea of creating an Acharya by vote has been, we've heard before, has been highly discouraged. That an Acharya is self-effulgent. Now, self-effulgent for us, we have to have eyes to see the self-effulgence. Otherwise, we expect the Acharya to be mystical. And of course, those who are sufficiently qualified may get some inspiration or some experience by association with the Acharya, but at least by hearing their words, then that should be inspirational for those who are receptive. In other words, we can't expect that everyone is going to have complete faith in the Acharya by experience, by complete experience, but at least by following the instructions, some instructions, as Prabhupada writes there, theoretically accepting that this person is a representative of Krishna, and therefore, in that submissive spirit, following the instructions, and then Krishna will reciprocate and one will be able to understand the experience, not only just understand, but eventually experience what the Acharya is saying, and therefore gain some faith in the Acharya. Now, everyone has to accept an Acharya. Everyone has to accept someone as a Mahajan. Mahajano yena katha sapanta. One time Prabhupada was talking to one man, and the man started to ask some questions about Lord Buddha. And Prabhupada said, "Do you follow Lord Buddha?" And the man said, "No, I'm curious. I'm asking some questions." So Prabhupada said, "Follow someone. Just don't ask questions. Do something." Now we're already doing something. We already have our authority. And our authority led us into not so pleasant circumstances. Every person in this world is listening to some kind of authority. Most of the people take their authority from the television set, or maybe from their teacher in high school, or maybe from some movie they saw, or some actor or actress, or some sports star. So everyone has an authority. Consciously or unconsciously, we're following that authority. But for those who are Brahma Jignasya, we're interested in the self and realizing ourselves as souls and our relation with Krishna. Therefore, we have to find a spiritual authority. These mundane authorities are not going to enlighten us about our spiritual existence or the relationship we have with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and even the fact that he exists or that we exist. Therefore, we have faith that we're eternal souls and that there is a God, and the purpose of life is to realize ourselves in the Supreme Lord. Then we have to follow an authority, at least theoretically, and see whether or not it brings about closer relationship with our own selves and with the Supreme Person and with everyone and everything else in relationship to him. Now, in the beginning, devotees, they talked about, when I joined the movement in 1968, and even before that, I heard about Srila Prabhupada from some of my friends and from reading the 1966, the East Village Other magazine. At that time, the only subject of conversation in the movement was Srila Prabhupada, known as Swamiji at that time. There are not very many devotees, but there were not very many books either. The only books available at that time were Srila Prabhupada's 3 original volumes of the first canto. And most devotees at that time were not necessarily scholars, and it was not necessarily very easy for anyone to read the original 3 volumes in English. And what to speak of how to practice it. When I joined the movement, there was no Mangalarti. The only thing we had was, we had bells. Following Srila Prabhupada, when we offered prasadam to our deities, then we rang a bell and offered incense. And that was offering prasadam, saying Prabhupada's mantra. That was our arti at that time. And we had Bhagavatam class in the morning, and we chanted our rounds, our japa, and that was our sadhana. And our service was in the temple. I was there once a month. At the end of the month, we go to the campus and we distribute back to Godhead. That was our preaching. And not only would we distribute back to Godhead, but we handed them out for free because no one knew how to sell anything. Now, how under those circumstances, except for whatever receptivity devotees had for for Srila Prabhupada, could we actually understand who Srila Prabhupada was? But we knew he was extraordinary because he was extraordinarily kind to the devotees. And there is some part of the philosophy that devotees could understand, for instance, that we're not this body or whatever. There's something that attracted one to a relationship with Srila Prabhupada. But from the very beginning of the movement, practically speaking, there was difficulty in understanding Srila Prabhupada. All right, one day I answered the telephone in Buffalo. We had a telephone in our temple. Telephones were not so, there was no such thing as a mobile telephone back then, or even a portable telephone. There was one telephone. And it cost money. It wasn't cheap to have a telephone or to call. One day the telephone rang. This is 1970, and I answered the telephone, and it was Purushottam Prabhu, who was Prabhupada's personal servant, and he was in Los Angeles. And he told me that Srila Prabhupada wants, at that time it was Swamiji, wants to talk to Rupanuga, who was my temple president at that time. So I went to get Rupanuga, and Rupanuga got on the telephone, and I stayed there to find out because it was, Prabhupada never used the telephone. He never called anyone. When he came to 26 Second Avenue, Srila Prabhupada asked if he could get a telephone. And the devotee said, yes, we can arrange that. And 2 days later, they installed a telephone in Srila Prabhupada's room in 26 Second Avenue. And then the next day, Prabhupada told the devotees to take the telephone now. He said that in India, if you want to get a telephone, you have to place an order for them to install a telephone. And if you pay a bribe, they'll install it in 6 months. So Prabhupada was quite amazed that in just a couple of days, they installed the telephone. But the very night they installed the telephone, he got a call at 12 o'clock at night. Ding, ding, ding. Yes, yes, yes. And the voice said, is that you, Swamiji? And Prabhupada said, yes, yes. What? He said, I just wanted to call you to ask how you are. The Prabhupada said, you're calling me at 12 o'clock at night to ask me how I am? I'm so sorry. And Prabhupada hung up the phone. The next day, Prabhupada said, take the phone out. So it was very rare for Prabhupada to make a telephone call, what to speak of even answering a telephone call. And Rupanuga told me after he spoke to Prabhupada on the phone, he said that Srila Prabhupada was crying, and he said they're trying to take the movement over, come to Los Angeles immediately. So Rupanuga Prabhu left the next day, and that was the first time I became a temple president for some time. And when he was there, Rupanuga found out that some of my godbrothers, who had, in order to avoid the draft in America during the Vietnamese War, went to India. And while they're in India, because they didn't have any shelter of other devotees from our movement, they took shelter of some of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers. And when some of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers heard that Prabhupada had taken the title of Srila Prabhupada, they started to criticize him that without any authorization, he took the title of their spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, and that he was not qualified for having such a title. So they told that to Srila Prabhupada's disciples, who developed doubts about Srila Prabhupada. And they started to convey that knowledge or that message to their god brothers in Los Angeles by letter. And therefore the authorities in the Los Angeles temple started to develop doubts about Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada started to realize that when one day when they had darshan of the deities, the greeting of the deities, he saw that the picture of his spiritual master was upside down on the altar. And that was very concerning to Srila Prabhupada. And then when he went to take Charanamrita, instead of having sugar, there was salt in the Charanamrita. And Prabhupada questioned, who has done this? And finally, one girl was giggling and said that when Mataji was giggling, he said, I did it. And then Prabhupada one day questioned the devotees and asked them if they're chanting on the Vyasasan before class, are you chanting 16 rounds? And not all the devotees raised their hands. And the ones who didn't raise their hands said, our authority said, we don't have time to chant our rounds. We have too much service to do. And then Prabhupada learned about the conspiracy to take over his position. They were going to retire Prabhupada and take leadership of the movement. And therefore Prabhupada called some of his leading devotees at that time, disciples, come to Los Angeles, and then he created the GBC. And at the same time, he gave those devotees, those authorities, he retired them from their managerial service and gave them sannyas. Those devotees who he gave sannyas left Los Angeles, started to preach, came to New Vrindavan in the Janmashtami 1970, I believe. And there they started to preach to the devotees who assembled, because everyone came to New Vrindavan for Janmashtami on the East Coast. It was a place of pilgrimage. And there the sannyasis started to preach that Prabhupada had left the movement. Prabhupada had indeed left Los Angeles and had started to travel towards India through Japan. But they started to preach to the devotees there that Prabhupada had left because we didn't recognize his actual position, that he was Krishna. So I was quite shocked. I remember one devotee, he stood up and started to protest that Prabhupada wasn't Krishna. And the sannyasi said, sit down. So it was quite a tense atmosphere. Luckily, Rupanuga Prabhu took me out of New Vrindavan. We went back to Buffalo. And then later on, those sannyasis were asked to leave the movement to stop preaching that Prabhupada was God. So they didn't accept him as the Acharya, they accepted him as God instead. Later on, or actually even earlier than that, Prabhupada's godbrother, one of his godbrothers, was actually traveling in North America, criticizing Prabhupada. And he was allowed to sit on the Vyasasana and give class, because the devotees didn't understand how Prabhupada was being criticized by Prabhupada's godbrother. So this criticism of Prabhupada and doubts about him didn't stop in 1970. Prabhupada's godbrothers continuously criticized him throughout the 70s. And indeed, even Prabhupada's disciples at times created doubts in Srila Prabhupada. That manifests especially after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, with his own Acharya system. But the first time I went to India in 1974, there was a temple president's meeting there, the first recognized pilgrimage or festival in India. international festival in Mayapur. It was attended only by temple presidents. I think there was around 100 temple presidents, and I was one of them. And we were all invited when we were there to go to one of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers' mats and take prasadam. So while we were there, one of Srila Prabhupada's the godbrother of Srila Prabhupada, his disciple gave a lecture. And in the lecture, this disciple of Prabhupada's godbrothers started to criticize Srila Prabhupada in a polite way. He said that Prabhupada didn't actually do anything significant. Basically speaking, he said he made some drug-addicted hippies into so-called devotees. So this is quite an insult. I felt insulted because I wasn't a drug-addicted hippie when I joined the Hare Krishna movement. I was thinking, well, why is he saying such things? In any case, when we went back to Mayapur, and when we went back to Mayapur, then Prabhupada's secretary came and told us, the devotees there, that Prabhupada had heard about that lecture that we had heard from Prabhupada's godbrother's disciple, and he said that anyone who heard this lecture was spiritually scarred for life. Prabhupada took it very seriously. And what to speak of after Prabhupada's disappearance, when devotees started to go to Prabhupada's godbrothers to find out what Prabhupada wanted. Now, of course, practically all of us, except for a few devotees who were personally attending Srila Prabhupada, were not aware of what Prabhupada said in his final days appearance on this planet, his instructions, etc. All we could do is take on faith what his leading disciples who were personally associating with him at that time were saying. And they came up with this idea that they had become empowered to become pure devotees simply by the fact that they were giving initiation. They had become Uttama Adhikars. And indeed, in order to propagate this philosophy, they put out biographies about Prabhupada and talked about Prabhupada in a way that made him seem like an ordinary personality. Because for the most part, Prabhupada didn't talk about his previous ashram, but he talked about his childhood. He talked philosophy. He didn't tell pastimes all the time. He gave us Krishna's message, especially from Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita, and encourage us to take it up, to understand. You read his books and follow the process of serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission to become eligible to receive Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy. But now we were presented with a biography or biographies that more or less depicted Prabhupada in some sense as an ordinary person. He got depressed. He was going to go back to India after being in America for some time. He was not successful in spreading Krishna consciousness, continuously going back, thinking that he couldn't spread Krishna consciousness here. His early family life was a disaster. He was more interested in making money than in serving his Guru Maharaj's instructions, etc., etc. Most of which was completely a concoction, a mental speculation based on nothing more than one's own interpretation of the few words that Prabhupada said about it, or even perhaps interviewing others who were also speculating in the same way. Because interviewing people not on the spiritual platform will only see a pure devotee from their external point of view. They could not understand Prabhupada's internal workings. And therefore, by establishing Prabhupada as just another initiating guru within our society, a person who was conditioned, but later on became perfect, certainly qualified them to be initiating spiritual masters and having the same respect, the same honor, the same worship that Prabhupada had. Of course, that was exposed later on, because as Prabhupada writes, that when one imitates the Mahabhagavad who's not qualified, he's sure to have difficulty in his service. So Prabhupada writes in the Nectar of Instruction, verse 6, so you can find this, Mother Lavandulata. I'll give you the words. Krishna's devotee is not subjected to material condition. Let me know when you can find that.
Mataji Lavanga Sochin.
Yes.
Maharaj, I'm sorry that phrase does not appear to any of the paragraphs. Could you please just keep going slowly? I'll
read it slowly. Krishna's devotee is not subjected to material condition, even though his bodily features may appear materially conditioned. One should therefore not see a pure devotee from a materialistic point of view. Unless one is actually a devotee, he cannot see another devotee perfectly. As explained in the previous verse, there are three types of devotees: Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyam Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. The Kanishta Adhikari cannot distinguish between a devotee and non-devotee. He is simply concerned with worshiping the deity in the temple. The Madhyam Adhikari, however, can distinguish between the devotee and the non-devotee, as well as between the devotee and the Lord. Madhyam Adhikari is a liberated soul who's beyond the material concept of life, not an ordinary devotee either. Prabhupada goes on to say, one should therefore avoid observing a pure devotee externally, but should try to see the internal features and understand how he's engaged in the transcendent loving service of the Lord. In this way, one can avoid seeing the pure devotee from a material point of view, and thus gradually become a purified devotee himself. In other words, we have to see every devotee, not only Srila Prabhupada, try to see him, how they're engaged in devotional service. Now, which amongst us have translated 80 volumes of spiritual literature at the age of 70 to 80? Which of us can travel around the world 14 times and establish in every continent, amongst every race, color, and creed and religion, establish devotees in Krishna consciousness? Which one of us could follow a program where we hardly sleep at night, but simply engage practically 24 hours a day in pure devotional service? I mean, if we think that such activities are ordinary, then of course it'll be very difficult to understand the internal features of Prabhupada. Where did this Shakti come from to be able to do that at the age of 80 years old or 70 years old? And Prabhupada goes on to write, those who think that Krishna consciousness is limited to a certain section of people, certain section of devotees, or a certain tract of land, are generally prone to see the external features of the devotee. Such neophytes, unable to appreciate the exalted service of the advanced devotee, try to bring the Mahabhagavad to their platform. We experience such difficulty in propagating this Krishna consciousness all over the world. Unfortunately, we are surrounded by neophyte God brothers who do not appreciate the extraordinary activities of spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. They simply try to bring us to their platform, and they try to criticize us in every respect. We very much regret their naive activities and poor fund of knowledge. an empowered person who is actually engaged in the confidential service of the Lord should not be treated as an ordinary human being. For it is stated that unless one is empowered by Krishna, one cannot spread the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. As other conversations, when the devotees were in doubt, when Prabhupada's disciples were asking Prabhupada, but Prabhupada on a morning walk, they said, Prabhupada, but sometimes it appears that the Acharya, he falls asleep or he commits mistakes, he misquotes verses, etc. So Prabhupada's answer was that you don't understand what perfection is. That the Acharya is not God. He doesn't pretend to know everything. But his perfection is how he preaches the bhakti cult. In other words, Prabhupada's mission as a perfect instrument of Lord Chaitanya was to bring people to Krishna consciousness, not debate about worldly circumstances. Come in. 15, okay, maybe 10 minutes. But anyhow, serve, yeah, you can serve now. Yeah. That wasn't his mission to debate upon whether the earth is round or the earth is flat, where the jiva came from. These were all issues that would actually distract people. And therefore, Prabhupada sometimes said one thing to one audience, one devotee or one group of people, and he said something completely different to another group, because Prabhupada generally didn't want to distract from the actual message that he was trying to convey by getting into unnecessarily arguing with people over insignificant topics. Prabhupada's mission was to spread bhakti, not, whether they went to the moon or went to Rahu or they went to the Arizona desert. Prabhupada said these things appropriately, or said under different circumstances, different things. So therefore, Prabhupada said his perfection is how, as it says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, perfection of Krishna's pure representative is how he's preaching the bhakti cult. That's all. And another conversation, one reporter was asking whether or not Prabhupada knew everything that was going on in ISKCON. And Prabhupada said, no, not necessarily. I know everything that Krishna wants me to know. I said, no, not necessarily. Krishna will tell directly. Oh, then Ramaswar, he said, yes, Krishna tells Prabhupada by giving him intelligence. And Prabhupada interrupted and said, no, not necessarily. Krishna will tell directly. A devotee always consults Krishna, and Krishna tells him, do like this, not figuratively, practically. Then the reporter, does that apply then to other kinds of decisions and other kinds of activities as well? Prabhupada, everything. Because the devotee does not do anything without consulting Krishna. Bali Maharaj. So that applies to a very greatly elevated soul, not to an ordinary person. Prabhupada. Yes, that is. Therefore, the minor devotees, they consult the spiritual masters. That is our process. Yasya prasadam bhagavat prasadam. So I have more to say, but we don't have the time to go into it so much. But we should understand that Prabhupada was always situated in transcendence. At least theoretically, we should accept that. And that everything he did was perfect. And if we didn't understand what Prabhupada was saying, or appeared to us that there were some contradictions in what he was saying, that's our imperfection. That we should try to understand how Prabhupada was trying to spread the Krishna consciousness movement, not whether he was accurate, whether we went to the moon or not, we went to Rahu, or we went to the Arizona desert. We should try to understand how Prabhupada was presenting Krishna consciousness in order to bring people to Krishna consciousness, not these external seemingly contradictions which have nothing to do with preaching the Sankirtan movement. And if one is envious of Prabhupada, then they'll find contradictions. And if one is at least theoretically accepting Prabhupada as the Acharya, a representative of Krishna, then one will be able to perceive by Krishna's mercy and by Prabhupada's mercy how Prabhupada was a perfect instrument for Lord Chaitanya, and therefore gradually get his mercy by following his instructions. Because if we don't accept Prabhupada, if we're doubtful, then we'll hesitate to follow his instructions. And if we hesitate to follow his instructions, then Krishna will not give us revelation of what Prabhupada was telling us. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Agnihotra.
Хари Кришна, Гуру Махарадж, спасибо вам большое за лекцию. У меня такой вопрос. Скажите, пожалуйста, вот преданные иногда присоединяются в наше общество через популярных харизматичных проповедников и могут годами или десятилетиями так и не соприкасаться со Шрилой Прабхупадой и не получать акцент на том, что Шрила Прабхупада наш ачарья, и базироваться на его книгах, а они вот на лекциях и рекомендациях преданных так и живут. Как преданным делать акцент на Шриле Прабхупаде в своей жизни, на его наставлениях, и даже если вот, может, даже не хватает понимания, что Шрила Прабхупада, он важен в нашей духовной жизни для духовного прогресса.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So the Agnihotra Prabhu's question is such that a lot of devotees have joined our movement through a very charismatic leaders. They have grown up on their lectures and they're continuing their education in our movement, following their books and their lectures. They don't see or understand. They don't even really interact with with Srila Prabhupada's books, and they do not understand the importance of Srila Prabhupada's presence in their spiritual development. How do we help devotees to focus on the importance of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, and how do we steer them into the direction of accepting Srila Prabhupada as a necessity for acceptance of the Srila Prabhupada's position as a necessity for their spiritual life?
Well, thank you for the question. I think we have to hope that, because you haven't mentioned any particular book, and I don't expect you to, or any particular devotee who's serving Srila Prabhupada in some leadership capacity. Still, we hope that by reading such literature and such preaching by Prabhupada's followers creates faith in Prabhupada as an acharya, as our founder acharya, as a sampradaya acharya, as a nitya siddha devotee, as a Mahabhagavat. Hopefully their instructions and literature create faith in these devotees that they should take shelter of Srila Prabhupada. If it doesn't, or it's not completely in that direction, then whatever influence we have on these devotees, we can try to inspire them to also read Prabhupada's books and try to understand Prabhupada properly as our ultimate shelter. Because even if we have a charismatic leader, the only way he's actually charismatic and giving us value is as much as they represent Srila Prabhupada and the teachings coming from our acharyas. No one in ISKCON can do any benefit to the devotees or people in general by creating their own philosophy. They can only do it by repeating the words of our acharyas in succession, which Srila Prabhupada is our founder acharya. So we should set an example of faithfulness to Srila Prabhupada, not blindly. At least theoretically, we should accept him as our founder acharya, and that his words are perfect. Put them into, try to hear them with submissive intent, trying to understand them, try to understand them from different points of view, try to put them into practice so we develop conviction in them, refine our skills and our loving exchanges with the other devotees, and develop the character of a pure devotee that the words of Prabhupada's words are meant to help us develop, become a perfect instrument for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one who's actually bringing the Vaikuntha atmosphere, the Vrindavan atmosphere, wherever we go, because we're actually absorbed in Krishna's name, form, quality, and pastimes. So we can't change. Krishna is making arrangements. We're not the super soul. Everyone's getting what they deserve and what they desire. All we can do is try to assist Prabhupada in his mission to the best we can. And that way we may serve ourselves and others in an appropriate way. Yes, any other questions? I think we have...
Гавидя Матаджи, Дамодар Пандит Прабху. У вас рука поднята. Спасибо большое, Гуру Махарадж.
Харе Кришна, Гуру Махарадж. Примите, пожалуйста, наши поклоны от всей нашей семьи. Также мы хотим преподнести поклоны всем вайшнавам, преданным Господа. Вся слава Шриле Прабхупаде. Я хотел задать такой вопрос. Вот, видно, GBC подняла стандарты по поклонению божествам. Вот, и на последнем Джан Маштаме нам не разрешили омывать божеств. Вот, и хотел бы узнать ваше мнение. Просто у нас...
Yeah. Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept our humble obeisances, and dear Vaishnavas, please accept our humble obeisances. So, Maharaj, it looks like GBC have raised the standard of deity worship, and last Janmashtami we weren't allowed to have an abhishek of the deities. We would like to know your opinion about this novelty.
Это хорошая возможность послужить новым преданным и вообще вот преданным, которые в духовной одежде, хорошая возможность послужить божествам. Но
it's such a beautiful opportunity for the new devotees or devotees who came and is wearing a devotional clothes to give direct service to the deities.
Да, хотелось бы узнать ваше мнение.
So we want to know your opinion about this.
Well, I can't give an opinion. There's so many details that I don't know about, and I'm not the manager in that temple, so I don't know. I can't. But in any case, our opportunity to associate with Krishna is not restricted by any managerial decision. If we want to bathe Krishna and we're sufficiently anxious to do it, we can bathe him within our mind, and that comes as the Brahmin and the nectar of devotion. He bathed Krishna in his mind, and he got the same result as if he bathed him personally, directly. So rather than try to argue with the authorities, we should go on with our devotional service for the most part and serve Krishna to the best, whatever opportunities we have, and not get so much into these controversies unless that's our service to do that. Now, management in ISKCON is not uniform, and there's so many details, so I can't really make any real comment on it, which would be valuable. But I'm just saying that we shouldn't be disappointed because Krishna is available for us if we sincerely want to serve him. Then he'll give us the intelligence how to please him, and that's the most important thing, that we please him, we please his representatives such as Shrila Prabhupada. Anything else? Okay. Thank you, Paula, Spasiba, Dr. Prantaraj.
Харе Кришна.
Харе Кришна, Гуру Махарадж.
Харе Кришна.
Харе Кришна. Shrila Prabhupada
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Lavangalata.
Thank you so much.
Always happy to be here, Maharaj. At your service always. Hare Krishna.